Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Good morning from Sridham Mayapur. This is our daily class from Srimad Bhagavatam. We've been reading from the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev, the third canto of the Bhagavatam, chapter 25, which has all about Bhakti. And we'd like to very much hear what Lord Kapila Dev has to say to his mother, and also what our Acharyas comment on. This is one of the most commented chapters from our Acharyas anywhere. So today we're reading from third canto, chapter 25, text 26. Bhaktya pumanjata viraga indriyad drishta shrutam madrachan anuchintaya chitasya yato grahane yoga yukto yatishyate rijibir yoga margai. Thus consciously engaged in devotional service, in the association of devotees, a person gains distaste for sense gratification both in this world and in the next by constantly thinking about the activities of the Lord. This process of Krishna consciousness is the easiest process of mystic power. When one is actually situated in that path of devotional service, he's able to control the mind. Srila Prabhupada in his purport describes, in all scriptures, people are encouraged to act in a pious way so that they can enjoy sense gratification not only in this life, but also in the next. For example, one is promised promotion to the heavenly kingdom of higher planets by pious fruitive activities. But a devotee in the association of devotees prefers to contemplate the activities of the Lord, how he has created this universe, how he is maintaining it, how the creation dissolves, and how in the spiritual kingdom the Lord's pastimes are going on. There are full literatures describing these activities of the Lord, especially Bhagavad Gita, Brahma Samhita, and Srimad Bhagavatam. The sincere devotee who associates with devotees gets the opportunity to hear and contemplate the subject of the pastimes of the Lord, and the result is that he feels distaste for the so-called happiness in this or that world, in heaven or on other planets. The devotees are simply interested in being transferred to the personal association of the Lord. They have no more attraction for temporary so-called happiness. That is a position of one who is yoga yukta. One who is fixed in mystic power is not disturbed by the allurement of this world or that world. He is interested in the matters of spiritual understanding or the spiritual situation. This sublime situation is very easily attained by the easiest process, Bhakti Yoga. Rijubir Yoga Margai. A very suitable word used here is Rijubi, or very easy. There are different processes of Yoga Marg, attaining yoga perfection. But this process, devotional service to the Lord, is the easiest. Not only is it the easiest process, but the result is sublime. Everyone should therefore try to take to this process of Krishna consciousness and reach the highest perfection of life. Gora Graganya Gana Gocha Goloruharam Goranga Guratama Gopyada Kopa Briksham Gopala Gada Ratidam Yati Singha Gora Govinda Deshikavaram Satatam Namami Vanchakalpatarubhishcha Kripasindhubhyaeva Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, Srimati, we're reading from the third canto, chapter 25. This is a devotional service, text 26 today. In his Krama Sandarbha commentary, Jiva Goswami explains that this verse, how we may question how this verse is in sequence, coming right after Satam Prasangam Mama Vairagya Samvido, which is speaking about Shraddha, Ratir, Bhaktir, Anukramishati, Krama, the sequence which goes from faith to Ruchi to praying Bhakti. Jiva Goswami describes that there are different types of association, and among saintly persons, some of them see things in terms of Gyan. And then he says there are others who are superior to them in vision. And so Lord Kapila Dev, in order to point out the longing of his mother for Bhakti, he points out the secondary nature now in this verse, with ordinary spiritual vision, this verse and the next verse. And he says that by Bhakti, one becomes detached and engages in yoga, engages in true Bhakti yoga. And he says these are the qualities of a candidate for yoga. Again, yoga here meaning then someone who connects with the Lord. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Sartha Darshani says a similar thing, a little different. He says that after describing pure Bhakti, Lord Kapila Dev is now describing yoga. And we'll hear in this chapter Lord Kapila Dev describing different types of Bhakti, Jnana Mishra Bhakti, Yoga Mishra Bhakti, Yoga Bhakti which is mixed with desires for Jnana, Karma, etc. So he says that in this verse it's describing how the yogi develops his distaste for happiness because he's thinking about his pastimes, the pastimes of Krishna, Madhrachana, and he's endeavoring for control of the mind. And he's endeavoring to control it by the path of yoga, which is made easier, he says, by mixing it with bhakti. Mm-hmm. And then Vishwanath says that in the future, men will endeavor on this path which I will establish. So we should understand something about the difference between Hatha Yoga or Ashtanga Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. And it's not that yoga is all bad and all demoniac, like some people sometimes suggest, but it's there for certain types of transcendentalists. But as Jiva Goswami is saying, as transcendentalists with superior intelligence, he'll want to take to the path of bhakti. Rupa Goswami also speaks about this yoga in the beginning of his Upadeshamrita, and he steals two verses from the literatures on Hatha Yoga. One of them he adapts a little bit, and the first verse is straight from it. Vacho vegam manasakroda vegam jiva vegam adadapasta vegam itan vegam yoga sahita diraha sarvam apimam pitivim sasishyat. Speaking about how someone should control the urge to speak, the mind, the kroda vegam, the actions of anger, jiva vegam, the desires of the tongue, udara and upasta vegam, the desires of the belly and the genitals, etan vegam yoga sahita dira. If someone can tolerate all these things, then sarvam apimam pritivim sasishyat. He can make disciples all over the world. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that this verse actually doesn't describe bhakti. This verse also works for yoga. But it's interesting and significant that in the beginning of his Upadeshamrita, his essential instructions, Rupa Goswami gives this verse. And the next verse is also straight out of the Yoga, Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's text 15 in the Yoga Hatha Yoga Pradipika. It's text 2 in Nectar of Instruction. Atyahara prayasas cha prajalpa niyamagraha janasanga shaloyam cha. But the Yoga Pradipika says, Sadbir Yogo Vinashati. Rupa Goswami changed it to Sadbir Bhakti Vinashati. That these 6 things will cause problems to bhakti, or they'll cause problems to yoga, depending on which book that you're looking at. So these things, why does Rupa Goswami include these things if we reject bhakti? Krishna tells Uddhava in the 11th canto Na sadayati mam yogo, na sankyam dharma udav, na sradhyayasta paschavo yata bhakti mamorjita. That this I can't be controlled by someone who's doing yoga, who's practicing the yoga system, nor by someone who's doing sankhya, nor someone who's doing vanashram dharma. I'm not controlled by that. Nor by swadhyaya, just studying the shastra, tapa, doing austerities, tyaga, having renunciation, as much as in yata bhakti mamorjita, as much as I am by practice of bhakti. So repeatedly, our acharyas and Shastra himself and Krishna himself repeatedly describes that the real best process of yoga, yogi mam apisari visham magatenantaratmana shredavan bhajate yamam sa niyukta tamomata, Krishna says in the end of the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, is the bhakti yogi. So then why does Rupa Goswami give these 2 verses in the beginning of his Upadeshamrita? Bhaktivinoda Thakur, as we mentioned, says that these verses do not describe bhakti, but they're kind of the doorway to bhakti. Because if we're not even controlling our senses, then there's no question of practicing bhakti. But as we spoke yesterday, bhakti is a positive process. It's not a focus on the negative. Our focus is not anartha nibritti, but our focus is on artha prabritti. And then automatically, Gyan and Vairagya, they become subservient to bhakti. Now, Rupa Goswami in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu speaks about this Gyan and Vairagya, which are angas of yoga, and their connection with bhakti. He says they're Gyana Vairagyayo Bhakti Pravesho Payogita Ishat Pratanam Eviti Nangatvam Uchitam Tayo. The same thing which Bhaktivinoda is saying in his commentary on the first few verses of Nectar of Instruction, Upadeshamrita. He says that Gyan and Vairagya, they're helpful for prabesh, for bhakti prabesh, to enter into bhakti. They're a little useful in the beginning. He says, but eveti nangatvam uchitam. They're not actually angas of bhakti, Gyan and Vairagya. And if we think that these are parts of bhakti, as sometimes devotees in the beginning of our movement especially, and even to this day, honestly, I see devotees seeing someone who knows a lot of verses, or someone who's really austere, they only sleep for 3 or 4 hours a night, or someone who's taken sannyas, or someone who's a brahmachari for life, we tend to think that person is the most advanced. But to reform our misunderstanding, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu displayed the pastime in Srivasanga of the brahmachari milk drinker who approached Srivas Thakur and requested to be able to see the dancing of the Lord. Obvious by that request, he's something of a devotee. Obviously by that request, he has some spiritual desire to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And Srivas Thakur was thinking to himself, well, gee, I'm just a pocha grihasta. Pocha grihasta in Bengali and Oriya means a rotten grihasta. And this fellow is such a good brahmachari. He doesn't talk to women. And he's such a good brahmachari, he doesn't even eat grains. All he takes is milk. How can I refuse him? He must have some qualification. Perhaps Srivas Thakur has still some minor attachment of his position as Narad Muni in his pastime. And so the brahmachari entered into the kirtan, was hiding, and Mahaprabhu was dancing, and then he said, what's going on? I don't have any ecstasy. There's someone who's not supposed to be here. And Srivas Thakur started getting nervous, and he said, well, he only drinks milk, and he's a great brahmachari. And Mahaprabhu said that babies only drink milk. But just because someone is drinking milk from their breast doesn't mean they can see my dancing, doesn't mean they can get my realization of me. Otherwise, every baby would be a great yogi because they're drinking milk from their mother, and that's all they're drinking. So in his commentary on this verse, Jiva Goswami's verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, we were just reading how Gyan and Bhakti are helpful to enter Bhakti. Gyan and Vairagya are helpful to enter Bhakti, but only in the beginning, and they're not considered angas of Bhakti. Jiva Goswami explains that this is speaking about 3 different types of Gyan, which are spoken about indirectly in Rupa Goswami's text 11, on the first section of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, where he says that Anyabilasita Shunyam Jnana Karmadi Anabitam Anukuyena Krishna Shivanam Bhakti Uttamam. That this Anyabilas has to be Shunya, having some other desire other than the Lord. But some Jnana and Karma, Adi, meaning also yoga, and Vairagya here also meaning as an anga of yoga, Jnana Karma Adi and Abritam, and they shouldn't cover bhakti. And Jiva Goswami speaks about this. He says there's three types of Jnana, Tat Padartha Jnana, Jiva Brahma Aikya Jnana, and Tvam Padartha Jnana. Knowledge of realization of the Jiva is Tvam Padartha Jnana. Tat Padartha Jnana is realizing the Lord, and Tvam Padartha Jnana is Tat Tvamasi, or understanding the realization of the oneness of the Lord and the Jiva. And that is rejected. But in the beginning, some knowledge can be helpful if someone understands something about Krishna Bhakti. But Bhakti, it should be understood, is not dependent upon Jnana Vairagya. In this verse that we're speaking from today, Lord Kapila Dev is telling his mother, he's speaking something about Vairagya and its role within Bhakti. And also in the verse is being spoken something about how the yogi, even the Hatha yogi, he's hearing something about Krishna. And even to this day, we find that many modern practitioners of Hatha yoga, which doesn't look very similar to the original yoga we hear about in Bhagavad Gita and the Vedic literatures. But even though it's been so watered down and so changed, still it's a common thing for them in their Hatha yoga classes. It's not uncommon for them to read some Bhagavad Gita or even to hear something about Krishna and the pastimes of Krishna. And that's helpful for them. They make some advancement by dint of that. But Jiva Goswami says that this Jnana Vairagya, they're somewhat useful only in the beginning of bhakti. And that means they're only suitable at the stage of giving up attachment to other objects. And therefore, Vachavegam Manasakrodavegam, this introductory verse of Upadeshamrita, is just the introduction. It's helpful to help one to give up attachment to other objects. He says, but when those attachments have been given up, and a person begins practicing bhakti, then Jnana and Vairagya become very insignificant. And actually, the Bhagavatam describes that Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Jnana Yat Yashavairagyam Jnanam Shiyadahoitukam, that just by practicing bhakti, then all these other things automatically come. They're servants of bhakti. We don't have to cultivate them. But persons who are bahirmukh janas, who are external persons who are in the bodily conception of life, they tend to respect these things more. They see, oh, this devotee is a great devotee because he knows Sanskrit. This devotee is a great devotee because he's memorized so many verses. That doesn't mean anything. We tell the story sometimes that I was once invited to give a lecture at a Pandal program in rural Orissa, and the temple made some arrangement for me. They sent a car. There was 25,000 people who came to that program because the governor of Orissa was going there to speak. And so when they sent a car for me, there was another speaker in the car already, and he was a professor of Sanskrit. And on the way, seeing that I was an aspiring Vaishnava, he started trying to impress me with his knowledge of Sanskrit and the Gita and the Bhagavatam. He had memorized the entire Bhagavad Gita, every verse, by the age of like 10 years old or something. And he knew, seen thousands of verses from the Bhagavatam, and not only that, he knew verses from Chaitanya Charitamrita, Ujjwal Nilamani, Lalita Madhav, and so many different Gaudiya Vaishnava literatures. We would consider that person maybe to be very, very advanced. But as I spoke to him further, he started revealing his attachment to eating fish and to smoking cigarettes and things. And he wasn't really a devotee at all. He had all kinds of strange ideas. But he had so much gyan, bhakti gyan even. So just because someone has a lot of information doesn't mean that they're actually a great devotee. Similarly, someone may be very, very renounced. They may be like the milk-drinking brahmachari, but that's also not by itself an indication of bhakti. We hear about other persons, even we give an example oftentimes of Garuda. Garuda is a non-vegetarian Vaishnava. He's not even properly following the four regulated principles. But don't think that he's an insignificant person or some kind of faulty person. He's the personal vehicle for the Lord. He's a personal associate of the Lord. So Jiva Goswami, in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he says that after beginning bhakti, thinking of these processes of Jnana and Vairagya and Yoga, they'll distract a person from bhakti. So they're useful only in the beginning of bhakti. And he says, and then Rupa Goswami explains why. Yad ube chitta katinya hetu praya satam mate sukumara sabhaveyam bhaktis tadhitur irita. Because Jnana and Vairagya, he says, they tend to make the heart hard and harsh. And so devotees have concluded that bhakti alone, whose nature is very tender, is a cause of entering into bhakti. Sometimes devotees, they have still a tendency for jnana, and this manifests as faith in debate or argument. But Sanatana Goswami, in Brihad Bhagavatamrita, he says that the devotees, generally, they don't engage in argument like that, because that argument is very, very harsh, and it hurts the soft bhakti. The only reason they might do it is because there may be some innocent person standing nearby. And so to help those innocent persons, we may argue with somebody. But otherwise, why argue? Especially amongst devotees, why argue? Better, Srila Prabhupada said in one letter, he said, why are you finding fault with the other devotees? He said, better you set an example by your own behavior and change them by your example. That's the process of bhakti. Our process is not the process of jnana and argument and debate. And therefore the Bhagavatam, the Mahabharata says, Tarko apratishta, that argument is inconclusive. So this, going back to this verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which describes how Jnana and Vairagya generally make the heart harsh or hard, Jiva Goswami, in his commentary, says that this verse speaks about another fault in being attached to Jnana and Vairagya, that it makes the heart hard. And we see this even again amongst devotees, the devotees who have more faith in argument and debate, in this kind of jnana, or in Vairagya, sometimes they become very, very harsh. And they become hard, and they criticize other devotees, and they become proud. And so Jiva Goswami says the nature of these practices is very harsh and unpleasant, and therefore it makes the heart similarly harsh. It's the opposite of sweetness and softness of the heart, which we want in bhakti. So then Jiva Goswami says, but someone may say, how can someone enter into the higher stages of bhakti without some kind of assistance? In other words, we may need assistance from Jnana and Vairagya. But Jiva Goswami answers that saying that bhakti is the cause of bhakti. Bhakti sanjayate bhakti. Jnana and Vairagya are not the causes of bhakti. They may have some utility in the beginning. And in his previous commentary in the 11th verse of the first section, first chapter of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Jiva Goswami explains that that why the word anabritam, or not covered, uncovered, is used when jnana and karma are being spoken about. Karma, adi, karmadi, adi meaning etc., and karma referring to varnashram dharma, and adi referring to hatha yoga and ashtanga yoga, that in the beginning, Jiva Goswami says, some of these practices can be beneficial. Varnashram dharma can be beneficial for bhakti. Practicing hatha yoga can have some benefit in bhakti yoga. We hear Bhaktivinoda Thakur has written a book called Prema Pradeep, and in that book, which is in the form of a novel, he speaks about one devotee who attained the platform of praying bhakti, but part of the way that he did that was through the process of Ashtanga yoga. through the process of Hatha Yoga. And he makes his point. It's a very, very unusual thing. We very rarely hear about Vaishnavas practicing Hatha Yoga in that way. But there are some examples. And he was using that Hatha Yoga to help him to control his senses and to help him fix his mind. But he was fixed on the goal of bhakti. So Jiva Goswami, when commenting on this 11th verse of the first section of Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, says that Jnana Karmadya Nabritam indicates, why not Shunyatam, why not no Gyan, no Karma, no Vanashram, no Yoga. He says Nabritam indicates that they may have some utility in the beginning, but they shouldn't cover bhakti, and they may cover bhakti in one of two ways. One is that one may think they're the goal. Vanashram Dharma is the goal, and I have to understand my position in Vanashram, or to become renounced is the goal, or to control my senses through yoga is the goal, or to get lots of information, have jnana is the goal. And that covers bhakti. The goal is bhakti. And the second way that these things may cover bhakti is that one may think that unless I do these things, unless I practice Vanashram Dharma, then I can't practice bhakti. Unless I become renounced, I can't practice bhakti. Unless I develop this information content, this knowledge, I can't practice bhakti. And that covers bhakti. And that's what's being spoken of by Rupa Goswami, which is a very negative thing. So this verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu later further condemns Jnana and Vairagya because they cause the heart to be hard. And then Jiva Goswami gives another argument. He says, but someone may say that bhakti may also become the cause of the heart becoming hard, because to get bhakti, one has to make some endeavor. They have to work very, very hard to get bhakti. And Jiva Goswami rejects that. He says, because bhakti by its nature is very tender, and because it consists solely of thinking of the Lord's sweet form qualities and pastimes, and therefore the conclusion is that bhakti should be performed with the desire to make the heart melt in relationship to the Lord. And he says, therefore, the best of all the persons who are offered prayers to is a devotee who's thinking of him, who's thinking of Krishna, whose karma smriti charano means, he says, referring to another verse in the Bhagavatam, remembering the pastimes of the Lord. And he says, without thinking about the Lord, how can someone attain bhakti? So then going on in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Rupa Goswami says, Rucham uvahatas tatra janasya bhajane hare vishayeshu garishto pi raga prayo valiyate. He said, if someone has developed some rag or some taste, some attraction for worshiping the Lord, some ruchi, even if he has rag, some material attraction, those attractions will for the most part be destroyed during sadhana, he says, without taking shelter of Vairagya. And Jiva Goswami comments on this. He says, previously Vairagya was condemned at the beginning of bhakti because it causes the heart to become hard. He says, but if the Vairagya is forbidden, then the person practicing bhakti may be filled with material desires, and then having those desires is negative, right? Because the Shastra says, Vishayavishta chittasya Krishna vesha sudurata varuni diggatam vastu vraja naindram kim apnuyat. And he quotes a verse from the Vishnu Purana, that a person who's absorbed in material enjoyment is very far away from being absorbed in Krishna. And the example is given, just like a person going east, how can he move to the west? The Vishnu Purana describes. So Jiva Goswami says, to answer this dilemma, Rupa Goswami gives this verse, that having a taste for bhakti will destroy attachment to material objects. And so the hardness of heart, which is caused by the practice of Vairagya, won't take place, but still detachment will manifest. And when one comes to the platform of ruchi, ruchim uvahatas tatra, again this verse in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu says, at the stage of ruchi, a taste for bhakti, then material attraction will be destroyed for the most part. And the meaning is, he says, it'll be completely destroyed when bhakti becomes more mature. So what's indicated by this verse, again, is that Bhakti produces not only Vairagya, but also Gyan. Vasudevi Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojita Janayat Yashivairagyam Gyanam Chayat Ahoitukam. That by rendering Bhakti to Krishna, one immediately acquires all these other things. So we don't concern ourselves with Gyan and karma and yoga. We take shelter purely of Bhakti. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in some of his articles, he's described this. He says that what is the object of the yoga process? The yoga process, the object of worship of the yoga process is a Paramatma, Ishvara, or impersonal Vishnu. That's the objects of yoga process. And he says within that process we find a few attributes of bhakti, but it's not pure bhakti. And he says generally religious principles in this world which pass for Bhagavad Dharma are all just yoga processes which are striving for realization of Paramatma. And we can't expect that in the end they're going to lead us to real Bhagavad Dharma. So that form of the imagined by the yogis at the time of their worship, whether it's the Virat Rup or the forearm form of the Lord in the heart, Bhaktivinoda says that it's not eternal. He says the process of Paramatma Darshan is superior to impersonal Gyan, but it's not the all-perfect and pleasing process. He says that the conclusion is that Paramatma Darshan, which is the goal of the yogis, is not Sudha Bhakti. And he says that the processes of Gyan and Yoga are incapable of approaching Bhagavan. And sometimes someone combines some Bhagavat Tattva with Gyan, and then that Tattva manifests, the Bhagavan manifests as a formless, impersonal Brahman. And when someone sees the Lord through the process, through the glasses of the yoga process, then he appears as a Paramatma feature. But because Bhakti Devi, she's not happy when she sees someone worshiping the Lord in any of his lesser manifestations. She can't tolerate that. And so they only have a partial realization. But that, again, doesn't necessarily mean that we carte blanche, we say in French, we carte blanche reject all different types of yoga, hatha yoga. There's a nice remembrance we were hearing a few days ago from Nanda Kumar Prabhu, Prabhupada's early servant, which I looked up and I'd like to read to you. He says, one of the things I had to give up when I moved into the temple was hatha yoga. Everybody told me that hatha yoga is included in bhakti yoga, and I didn't need to do hatha yoga. I only needed to dance in the kirtan. He said, I was stubborn about it for a while, but when I moved in the temple, there was no time for it and no place to do it. And then he got to be Prabhupada's personal servant. And so then there was some time in his schedule. So then he started doing his yoga asanas again in the morning, just before cooking for Prabhupada. And so he was doing it for some days, and he was thinking to himself, I should really ask Prabhupada about this personally. And then after 2 or 3 days of doing it, one day he brought in Prabhupada's lunch plate. And Prabhupada told him, he said, I've been watching you, I see you're doing yoga exercises. And then the Kumar Prabhu thought, maybe I'm in trouble. He said, yes, sir. I like very much how Nanda Kumar Prabhu used to address Srila Prabhupada as sir. It's very sweet because that's the culture he grew up in. It's not Indian culture, but it's a really respectful address from his heart. He said, yes, sir. I was going to ask you about that. The devotees are telling me that it's Maya, that it's not a process. And then Prabhupada told him, actually, these exercises are very good for your health. We don't want people to become distracted, so we don't teach it. But for you, it's very good, and I encourage you to do it. Prabhupada encouraged Nanda Kumar Prabhu to do that hatha yoga. And then sometime later, they were walking in Balboa Park in San Diego, and our dear friend Bhaktidas Prabhu was there, other devotees. And as they were walking with Prabhupada, they saw some hippie doing sirsasana, standing on his head. And Prabhupada looked over and he said, this is sirsasana, this is very good for health. There are many of these different asanas and they're very good for the health. And so Nanda Kumar, remembering this, he said, with a little sarcasm toward yoga, an older godbrother said, so we should do this every day then, Prabhupada? And Prabhupada didn't say anything. He just kept walking. And finally, when he got back to the car, Prabhupada turned around and told him, it's not necessary. And then Nanda Kumar was remembering what Prabhupada had told him. So perhaps Srila Prabhupada had said this because if he would have said it's a very good thing, then instead of Mangal Artik, devotees would be doing Surya Namaskar, like Anapayani Radha, instead of Mangal Artik, she's doing Surya Namaskar every day. And we have our milk rice, Krishna from his commentary. It's true. So it's not that it's all bad, it's all Maya, but it depends upon the mood the devotees do it in. In this regard, I'd just like to speak a story about Shankaracharya. Shankaracharya appeared in Kerala in South India, the river bank of the river Purna, in a small village which is known as Kaladi or Kolti. He was born from his father's name was Shiva Guru, and his mother's name was Subhadra. His father's name was appropriate, Shiva Guru, because his son was actually Lord Shiva, so he's the guru of Lord Shiva. But his father passed away when Shankaracharya was 3 years old. And at the age of 5, he got his Upanayanam ceremony. And by the age of 7, he'd studied all the Vedas and Vedic literatures. He was a very extraordinary person. Now, he was very attached to his mother, very devoted to her. But when he finished his education, he was 7 years old. It's like having a PhD at the age of 7. He asked his mother for permission to take sannyas. He's 7 years old. And his mother has no more husband or anyone to take care of her. And she started crying, no, you can't do that. So then one day he was taking baths in the Purna River with his mother, and suddenly a crocodile caught hold of his leg. And his mother started crying, oh, my baby. And then Shankaracharya very calmly told her, said, maybe this crocodile is telling me something, that if you give me permission to take sannyas, and it'll let me go. In any case, mother, he said, you have nothing to lose. If you give me permission to take sannyas and it doesn't let me go, then I die. I'm going to die either way. But maybe I'll live, and then I'll take sannyas and you won't see me, but at least you'll know that I'm still alive. So his mother was crying, and she finally agreed. And then the crocodile let go of him. And then to take sannyas, Shankaracharya ripped his sika out of his head and broke his Brahman thread. Similarly, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said he didn't have a Brahman thread or a sika, although we can't tolerate to think of him like that. So our acharyas always depict him with a sika and a Brahman thread. So in that way he took sannyas, and when he went home to confirm his decision with his mother, she again began to cry, and she said, my dear Shankar, who's going to do my funeral rites when I die? And then Shankar said, don't worry, I'll do it. And then his mother said, okay, you can take sannyas, but you have to come back and see your mother to do my funeral rites. And so then Shankaracharya, he approached Govinda, Bhagavat Padacharya, on the river Narmada, and he took sannyas from him, and he got the name Bhagavat Puja Padacharya, or we know him better as Sripad Shankaracharya. And he went to Kashi and he wrote his commentary on Vedanta Sutra. So he was traveling throughout India with his disciples and preaching. And once through his mystic power, Shankaracharya came to understand that his mother was getting ready to leave her body. So then he told his disciples, I have to go take care of my mother, because he's not really a brahmachari, he's a mamachari. So he told his disciples like that, and then mystically he traveled through the air back to where his mother was to see her at his deathbed. He offered obeisances to her, and when his mother saw her, she became very ecstatic and happy. And he told her, mother, don't be sad, I'm here. Now tell me, what is your heart's desire? And she said, it's my good fortune you're here, what more can I want? She said, I don't want to continue living in this old body, but see to it, please, that I attain the best destination, and then you should cremate my body. And so then Shankaracharya started preaching to his mother, Tat Tvam Asi, Sarvam Kal Vidam Brahman. Everything is Brahman, you're Brahman, and this and this. And Shankaracharya's mother's listened to her, and she said, this is really nonsense. I don't like this. I don't want to meditate on this. I want to hear something about some attractive personality, so please reveal that Lord to me. And so then Shankaracharya started speaking verses glorifying Lord Shiva. And then suddenly, on his mother's deathbed, some of the associates of Lord Shiva appeared there. And they got like 8 eyes and 9 eyes and 3 arms and 12 arms, and they looked really ugly and scary. And his mother became frightened. And so Lord Shiva and Lord Shankaracharya understood this also is not going to work. So then he started speaking and reciting prayers to Mahavishnu and Lakshmi Devi and speaking about them. And his mother started smiling. This is good. I like this. And then suddenly the Vishnu Dutas came there. And his mother, Shankaracharya's mother, offered obeisances to her son. And she got into that Vaikuntha airplane. And she went back to the spiritual world, the abode of Lord Vishnu. And the story continues after that Shankaracharya had a desire that I'm supposed to do the cremation and funeral ceremony for my mother. So he called for all the relatives and neighbors to help him. But they started laughing at him. And they became disgusted. They said, "You're a sannyasi. How can you do such a thing?" And he got down on his knees and begged them, "Please help me." But they just laughed at him and made fun of him. They even wouldn't give him a little bit of fire to cremate the body. So then Shankaracharya, he took some wood and he raised his right hand. Fire came out of his right hand and lit the firewood on fire. He's Shankaracharya. And he performed the cremation of his mother. And then he cursed the people of that place. May all of you become incompetent to study the Vedas. No sannyasi will visit your home to beg for alms. And you'll have to cremate dead bodies in your own compounds of your houses. And from that time on, Vedic study declined in that place, and no sannyasis ever came to beg food or anything. Because someone who criticizes an innocent person, a mild person, they cause some trouble to that person, they'll get trouble back. And examples given, just like sandalwood tree is very cooling, but the same sandalwood tree, if you strike it, that fire can come out of that sandalwood tree. So this nice story from the life of Shankaracharya illustrates that that Gyan and Vairagya may have some utility. Even in the life of Shankaracharya, he found some utility for Gyan and Vairagya. But at the end, he rejected all of that for Bhakti. His own mother said, "This is nonsense. I want something more personal, something sweet." So we'll stop there. Again, we're a little late this morning. Anybody else have any comments or questions here? Nice to see Amsamati and Madhupati Prabhu. Aditi's here. Hi, Krishna Aditi. Nice to see you. Mitravinda, Brajabanita. Hi, Krishna Brajabanita. Hope you're being nice to your cats. And Kalki Prabhu's here. Hi, Krishna. And Alex has quoted this verse, Vasudevi Bhagavati, very important verse. And Alex says, it's amazing how Shastra brings mercy, but a person who knows the entire Gita and thousands of verses from the Bhagavatam, he didn't get mercy. Maybe they got some mercy, but because of some attachment, they couldn't get very high form of mercy. We have to go to the devotees. We have to hear from the devotees. We should take shelter of pure bhakti. Hare Krishna. So many nice devotees taking part here today. Ramana Sukhaprabhu is here also. And Ramana Sukhaprabhu is pointing out on the cover of Easy Journey to Other Planets is Krishna Kunkumasai is a yogi in meditation. And he says the topmost chakra there is depicted as Goloka Vrindavan. Hare Krishna, my pranams to Havi Prabhu also is here. It's my guru in general. The topmost chakra there is depicted as Goloka Vrindavan with Radha and Krishna. So modern yogis, he says, do modern yogis not understand the seventh chakra correctly? Yes, certainly they don't. They don't understand the proper process of yoga at all. And people, mostly they're doing it to lose weight or to have a sexy body or this or that. Natalia, she comments, Vaishnavas don't argue but set an example. She's appreciating that. Right? Krishna doesn't tolerate when someone reaches him as Paramatma. The difference is in having that Krishna's in the Vaishnava's heart, isn't it? Yes. So if we associate with the Vaishnavas, Krishna's in their heart. They're not meditating on the Paramatma in the heart. And Madhupati Prabhu was commenting, he says, if I didn't do a Surya Namaskar every morning, I wouldn't even be able to walk. But this is but the oiling of the service car. Yes. And that's our point also. We shouldn't be fanatics and just think it's all nonsense, it's all Maya or something. It's a very good thing for health. Prabhupada told that to Nanda Kumar Prabhu and encourages this is a good thing for you to do. But we should keep its perspective in place. My Guru Maharaj in general, I saw with devotees, he discouraged them from doing any kind of hatha yoga, at least in public. Perhaps because he was afraid the devotees then would start taking more shelter of that. Anybody else have any other comments on Anapayani? We're going to try something. I'm going to ask a question here from Madhupati and Amsumati. See if you can hear her voice. She's speaking.
Hare Krishna, my pronouns.
Please, Madhupati or Amsumati or someone can just let us know. Can you hear her? She's speaking right now.
Hare Krishna. Is it okay?
Okay, let's try to switch things around. Yeah. Give me that first. Hare Krishna, can you hear me? Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask about the second verse of Nectar of Extraction. You mentioned that there is some verse about Hatha Yoga or something that has the same words, but just the last part is different. Does it mean that Rupa Goswami took this verse from some shastras?
Yeah, that was exactly my point.
So interesting.
Let me see, I can't remember. Hold on to that.
Sorry?
Can you hear me now? Madhupati Prabhu, you can hear me right now? Just please say yes again or no. I'm going to wait. I'm just going to keep talking. Please let me know if you can hear me right now. If you can hear me now, I don't think anybody can hear me right now. I don't think this is working. Okay. So, Anapayani is making a comment that, Rupa Goswami, he's quoting from Yoga Shastras.
And he changed the word.
But he changed the verse.
Well.
he added the word Bhakti. But he's not changing Srimad Bhagavatam. No need for that. Okay, anything else? Krishna can just take this, talk into that.
Hare Krishna. I marked this point about how devotees' attachment to Dhyan manifests in debate and arguments. And I just thought that this was such an important thing. I never really connected it. Of course, we know that dry renunciation makes the heart hard, but also how Dhyan also can make the heart unfeeling, and how soft Bhakti Devi cannot tolerate that in his devotees. And I also really, a simple point that we know that still, that having a taste for Bhakti will destroy all material attachments without separate endeavor for renunciation. That is an important thing for me. And I also I haven't really consciously thought about how Bhakti Devi is actively unhappy with someone who is not worshipping the highest form of the Lord. Did I understand correctly that you said that?
Yes. So Krishna couldn't help people in that way. The reason I keep asking these questions, we have two mics, and one of them I'm not sure is working. Yes, Madhupati Singh can hear, but he doesn't think the mic is connected. Yeah, I think the battery's dead on this mic. That's the problem. Okay, thank you, Madhupati.
Can I say one last thing?
Yes.
Which Krishna didn't mention, maybe. But you mentioned about story with Brahmachari and Shivas, and I was thinking that you make a point about that he probably was attached to his pastimes as an Narada Muni. That's like
Brahmachari.
Yeah. Thank you. And but my thought and question is that he was appreciating his qualities that he's renounced, and I was thinking, and at the same time it was kind of material quality, but as a devotee, Srivastava Prabhu was appreciating his qualities. It doesn't matter if material or not. And I'm thinking, how should we appreciate others' qualities? So the question is.
So I think it's a good point. So Srivas Thakur is humble, and by his humility, he's also teaching us we should respect and appreciate the qualities of renunciation and karma and jnana. If someone's nicely situated in Varnashram Dharma, we should give great respect to them. That's a very, it's not a small thing, it's a very big thing. But we're not taking shelter of that for bhakti. And as we were mentioning also, Krishna Kumar was mentioning how Gyan manifests sometimes in devotees and they have more faith in debate and argument. And as Rupa Goswami is saying in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, that'll make the heart hard. And we see devotees who have more attachment to this Gyan, they think this is a real standard and debate is a real thing. They become proud. And they lose their humility and they don't give proper respect to devotees. Their hearts become very, very hard. So it's a thing we should be very careful about. So we're going to stop here. Krishna Kun has another
It's a question. One question or request. You mentioned that Shankaracharya was taking sannyas by ripping out his sika and tearing his Brahmins, where it's pretty intense. And how we cannot tolerate seeing Chaitanya Mahaprabhu without sika and Brahmins, and therefore our acharyas depict him like that. Can you comment anything on that?
Just as Swarup Damodar Goswami and Jagadananda Pandit, they made a soft bed for Mahaprabhu, initially out of cotton, and Mahaprabhu wouldn't accept that, so they made it out of pine leaves, because they couldn't tolerate seeing Mahaprabhu doing renunciation. Mahaprabhu, in some paintings, some old paintings, you see Mahaprabhu doesn't have the secret.
Yeah.
Because he'd taken sannyas in the line of Shankaracharya from not Brahmana, say Brahmana Bharati, but from Keshav Bharati.
Right. Sorry.
In the line of Shankaracharya, and that's their system. But we have our Vaishnava system. So we'll stop there. Dear devotees, if you have any other comments or questions, go ahead, please write them in. Thank everyone very much for taking part in this. Again, we're not going to be here tomorrow, Wednesday and Friday. We're not going to be live streaming class, so we'll see you again on Thursday and Saturday. Grantarashina Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Goprim Anandi Hari Hari Bo, Vamshakopa Vidischa, Kripa Sindhu Vicha.